this is AndyTube. In this video I want to show you all the correct places to lubricate this Singer Model 413 Stylist vintage sewing machine. And the reason I decided to make this video was when I was looking over the instruction manual, in the index I didn't find anything about oiling the machine. All I found was a reference for caring for your machine, to see page 53. So I went there and it talks about using the lint brush and stuff up in the nose end, and then it says after you've cleaned it, put a drop of oil at these places indicated. And if you keep reading, it says approximately once every year under normal conditions, clean and lubricate all moving or rotating machine connections to ensure freedom of movement and to protect metal parts from excessive wear. And then to see how to remove the top and bottom covers, see page 54. And I don't ever remember having this on a Singer manual before, that they didn't have a picture and showing you, like a drop of oil and put one here, here, like that. So I was just really kind of surprised by that, because to lubricate all moving or rotating machine connections. Okay. So I think what happens is places get skipped and people lubricate some areas they shouldn't, especially the plastic parts, which really isn't recommended. And in my experience, when I restore a vintage machine there's been oil on plastic gears and levers, the hydrocarbon has reacted with the plastic and made it discolored and brittle, and you end up with broken gears and cracked levers and stuff like that. So I just thought I'd go over where I think the machine should be oiled. And in my opinion, you should certainly do it more than once a year. I don't know what normal use is, but in the older machines, they used to say, like oil this every time you sew. But anyway, going by the manual, the instruction manual for the machine, they say put one drop of oil here, or oil it here at the top of the presser bar bushing. And I agree with that, because the bushing guides the presser bar up and down, so you should have oil in there. And they say the same thing on the needle bar. Up here at the top, this little bracket here holds the needle bar and connects to the vibrating mechanism or swing or zigzag mechanism. But there's like a bushing here and a bushing there, so oiling it there is proper. On this swivel mechanism, you see this kind of square aluminum block here. That's part of the frame, and then this arm comes from the needle bar holder, and a drop of oil between those two, where it's always going to be swinging back and forth like that, is good. And below that arm you see a little coiled spring there, right? And I would put a drop of oil up on the top of that spring and let it come down inside there and do this part. Okay. And then there's one other place that they say to do it, and I'm going to try and show that to you, and I think I'm going to have to lift up the camera and go handheld to do it. So I'm going to try doing that while leaving the camera on the tripod, so this might be fun. Be hard to get in here. Yeah. My third hand's at the dry cleaner today, otherwise I'd be using it to do this better. So this is part of the thread take-up lever. And this used to be all metal, these parts. And what they've done on this machine and some others is saved 5 cents. And while this part that connects to the counterweight and comes out to hold the thread is still metal, the connecting link here, this piece, is now some kind of plastic. So before, where you would, is this light on? Yeah. Before, where you would definitely put a drop of oil in between these two, because they just, they just rub on each other every stroke. Do not do that now because of the plastic. Do not put oil here. But down in here, gosh darn, connects. And you can see that where that silver reaches the black down in there. Let me try and turn that just a little bit back. Yeah. So there's a stud there that's going into, yeah, that little shiny down there. That's the end of the take-up lever, and it's connected to a stud going into the counterbalance on the arm shaft. And where that stud sticks out, that little housing for it, there's a hole in there. So you want to put some oil in the hole. It's a little tiny hole. Put a drop there to try and get it in on the swivel stud, but also where that shiny chrome metal rubs up against the black metal down in there, you want to put a drop of oil, because that is a metal on metal rubbing. So that's it for them. They say that's it, and then once a year, go through and clean the machine and lubricate moving parts. Well, okay. So if parts are metal on metal, I would say yeah. But do you see here, like where the arm shaft comes into the bearing right here? People see that moves, and they say, wow, that's metal on metal. So they're putting all kinds of oil right here, and that's a waste. That's not where it goes. You see this hole up here, not the screw hole for the cover, but this hole right here, that's the housing for the bearing, that arm shaft bearing right there. It's bearing the weight of the arm shaft. And this is where you put a couple, 3 drops of oil, because that'll go right down inside that bearing and lubricate it. So if you're putting, the way they say, metal on metal here, you're wasting it. And if you're not putting it here, your bearing's drying out, which is just going to make it wear and run hot and be noisy. So over here, you see when you move these levers, maybe you see some parts move down in there. If you want to put a drop of oil here on the swivel, see when I move the positioning lever, how that swivels a little. Okay, go ahead. That's not going to hurt anything. It's all metal. People put oil in here, and what that's going to do, the oil will go down and get on the plastic pattern disc underneath. So don't put any oil around these plastic things that move, right? Personally, I wouldn't bother with any oil up here at all, but I would come over to the other end of the shaft, and down next to that spring is the oil port. Let's call it an oil port. See the hole right there? That's to go down to the bearing on the other end of the horizontal arm shaft. So they don't, how would you know to put a couple, 3 drops of oil down there for that bearing. You don't see anything moving metal on metal. You don't see moving parts there. But believe me, you want to keep oil on that bearing. So this is, you don't need to oil anything here. This is the, you know, the screw hole for the cover plate. But down in here on the other side of these springs, right there is the forked feed shaft. And that's what you adjust for feed and reverse. And you see that there's like a fork that sticks up here. There's one side of it, and here's the other. And in between you see this kind of like a metal cam rising up and going down. That's like elliptical. You want to put a couple drops of oil on that, okay, because it is metal to metal, and every stroke it turns metal on metal, and that should be oiled. Okay, nothing else down under here needs any oil. There's a plastic gear down in there. You don't want to get any oil on that. So that's about it for the top. The hand wheel end arm bushing, the fork feed elliptical, couple drops there, and come up here to the front bearing housing port and put a couple, 3 drops in there, and then that should be enough for the top. Okay, now let me rearrange this and I'll continue. Okay, so up here now on the, you know, the bed of the machine, we want to open the bobbin case slide cover. And if we look down in there, they say to put a drop of oil, and they kind of got an arrow in this general area. Okay, but what's going on here is your bobbin case is riding on the race of the hook. So if you can see where that bobbin case right here or right there, let me turn the hand wheel and we'll start rotating that hook. Can you see that hook go by here? Okay, and you see it's riding on a ledge. It has a ledge of, the hook has a ledge that the bobbin case rides on. So a drop of oil someplace to get onto that bobbin case edge so it'll seep in and get on the race, because that's, imagine how many thousands of times that hook spins around on the bottom of the bobbin case there. So you want to put a drop of oil there, and you can put a drop and run the machine a little bit and then take a Q-tip or a rag and wipe up. You should always wipe up any excess oil afterwards. If you wanted to clean this and oil it, you can lift up the positioning spring bracket, lift it up and move it over to the right, and you can just pull out. Maybe you saw this in my tour video. You can take out the bobbin case, and you can come in here with a little screwdriver and gently clean out the lint, or take a wooden spudge or a wooden toothpick, because you don't want to scratch this, and clean all the gunk out of here. I just take it and spray it with a crud cutter and scrape it out and dry it off. And you could put a drop or 2 of oil right in that space after you clean it. Or you could come right over here, and that little edge right there is called the race of the hook. And when you put this bobbin case on, that race is going to fit right in that groove. And that's what the bobbin case sits on as the hook races around. So you could clean this out and put a drop or two of oil in there, or clean it and put a drop right on the edge of that, and then you could put the case back in. Yep, make sure I've got it on the race, and then put the positioning finger back like that. So like my wife, she doesn't use a front drop-in bobbin very often, but when she did, she would just put a drop of oil here, right there, run the motor a little bit, spread it around, and then take a rag or a Q-tip and come in there and wipe up the excess oil. She didn't want it to get thrown on the thread or her material, But that is where to oil that bobbin case and the hook race area right there. Okay, now there's a couple of holes on the top of the bed of the machine. You can see one here and you can see one back here. And again, in this instruction manual, they don't mention this stuff. It's just like, yeah, where you see metal on metal and mechanisms moving against each other. Well, all you see here is a hole, but you want to oil that, because that goes down to the bottom bearing of the vertical shaft. The shaft that runs from the horizontal arm shaft and comes down here and has a pulley on the end of it that brings power down below for the feed system and to turn the hook and to move the feed dog. And I'll show you the bearing down below, but you want to, if you have the tube especially, stick it way down in there. I mean, that's how far down it'll go inside. Stick it down in there and put 2-3 drops of oil down in there on the bottom of the bearing. If you don't have a spout, just get the oil in the hole and let gravity will take it down there. Now on some of if you've seen the 301s and the 401, 404 and the Rocketeers, there's some holes up here. One of them is for a bearing because they have a shaft. They don't have a belt. They have a shaft down here. And there'll be a hole over here for a bearing. But that's not what this is. This is strictly for an attachment. This right here, like a feed cover plate or a what do they call it? A seam guide. And if you're wondering about this, the way to tell is to stick your oil tube in there, and I mean, look how far it goes. Or stick a wood stick or a toothpick, and then look underneath and see if you can. It's going to fall right through. If you can see, let me see if I have another stick here. If you can see it coming out on the bottom, you'll see it's just going to put oil on the oil pan at the bottom of the. That's too big. On the bottom of the machine. Let me tilt this back a little bit and see if we can. Whoop. Let me put that oil tube down in there. And look, can you see it here? Sticking it just look, it just comes through right through the hole. It's going to get on your timing belt and just drip down into the oil pan on the bottom of the machine. That hole is strictly just for attachments. So do not put oil in there. Right? Okay. So now that we're down here, I needed to show you this anyway. Let's see if I can move my lighting around here a little bit, because there's they don't even show a picture of this, but there's several places that you want to oil on the bottom side of this machine. And I would do it more than once a year myself. When you turn this and you do see metal on metal, That's what we're talking about. Finally, the metal on metal movement makes sense. Okay, so this is the let's see, is this the lift bar? This is the feed rock bar, feed rock shaft. That makes the elliptical movement of the feed dog. And there is a bushing right here that connects the bar into the casting. You want to put a drop of oil right there on that. Okay, and then you see there's like a screw here, swivel bolt that goes in there, and that is constantly moving. So people say, oh, there's metal on metal, but it's one of those tricky ones, because right up here there is a hole to put the oil inside, and then it will lubricate here. If you put the lubrication here, some will get inside, but you're better off to put a drop or two in this little hole up here. That's what it's for. So when you see a hole on this kind of a connection, that's where the oil goes. Up here there is no oil, but the metal moves on the metal, so you just want to put a drop right there. Here you put a drop or two in the hole. Okay. Then as we're coming down here, you're going to see a similar, a piece of cotton stuck on there. You're going to see a similar movement on the feed lifting shaft. This is what raises the feed dog up and down. And there's no hole, oil port. There's no hole up in here, so you just put a drop of oil where the two swivel. They connect and they swivel right there. No hole like there was up here. So just put it between the two, and there's a gap. Put it in there, and then down here too, on this bushing and connection at the bottom where it moves back and forth. Okay, and there's a swivel bolt that goes into it. Put a drop here. There's nothing. This, remember that hole up on the bed I told you goes to a bearing? This is the bearing housing for the bottom bearing of the shaft that goes up to the top. There's a gear up there, and then the pulley down here. That's how the power comes down below. And when you put the oil up in that bed on top, and I told you it goes down that hole an inch or so, that's where it's going, into the housing for this shaft bearing right here. And there's nowhere here to put oil on anything. So that's why you don't want to miss that hole up at the top. You don't need to oil any of these pulley pieces at all. Don't get oil anywhere near that timing belt. No reason for that. Okay? But where all these shafts come over here on this side and rock back and forth, yes, you want to. So if we started up here where this shaft has a swivel bolt that goes into the casting, there's no oil port hole, so you just put a drop of oil where the two meet right there. Okay, and then how can I see if I can show this? Yeah, this is always a hard one to show. But there's, between the rock and the lift, between these two bars, they connect right here. And that kind of coordinates the power and aligns the feed dog. And there's like this kind of figure-8 piece of metal with some pins that connect the rock and the lift together. And so on the top part of the figure-8 back in here, you want to put a drop of oil, and here where you see there's a swivel pin going through the bottom of the figure 8, and it goes into the bottom of the feed dog. Here's the bottom of the feed dog right here. That's like the feed dog arm. So right there, there's your metal on metal that you want to oil. Okay, and then coming down, you've got the other end of this shaft that has a bushing that is inside the casting, and you see that movement there. It's back and forth, you know. So like kind of swinging or swiveling back and forth. So you got your drop of oil here. So you've got 1, bottom of the 8, figure 8, 2, top of the figure 8 is 3. The bearing up here is 4. The bearing up here is 5. The oil port hole here is 6. This swivel connection with no port is 7. And this end of the shaft is 8. So there's 8 points down here. And I don't know, if you read that and it said metal moving on metal, where would you you know, oil? I don't think anybody would oil those oil ports up on the flatbed that go to the motor, to the shaft bearings. And I don't think anybody would, unless they were familiar with it, would put oil in the top main horizontal arm shaft bushing port, oil ports. Nothing around the motor end or belt, anything down here. If you do have the hand wheel off, I would clean the hole that goes through the hand wheel. I would clean that out and put a drop or 2 of oil on the end of the shaft where that spins. But there's nothing in here, any place to oil. Don't get any oil around the belt or the pulley or anything like that. Okay. Alright, now I got some dirty fingerprints on here. Okay, so that's in my opinion the correct places and complete oiling of the Singer Model 413. There's one other thing I'll mention, because I know some experienced people are going to say, back in here is the worm gear for this little pattern selector, like a cam stack. And you'll usually see some grease in there. And because I think the cam stack gear is plastic, if you see grease on that worm gear, that's great, you're done. If the worm gear is filthy and you have to clean out the old muck, or you look in there and the worm gear is dry, I would put some grease back there, a little bit. I mean, I'd squeeze 1/8 of an inch onto you know, the artist brush, and go in and wipe it along that worm gear to get some grease in there. And this type of grease, this is what I use, Triflow clear synthetic. It will not hurt that plastic. Okay? So if it's bone dry, or you have to clean all the muck out and then it's bone dry, then you're going to want to put a little bit, and I mean squeeze about that much onto your brush. Can you see that? And kind of wipe it along the gears there, and then it will spread around. And I use the Triflow Superior lubricant oil with PTFE. But you don't, if you don't have access to this, or this costs more than sewing machine oil, and you don't care for that, that's fine. But use a sewing machine oil, which is usually like a mineral oil. Just use a sewing machine oil. I'm sure that there's other brands of oil, and some of them also, I'm sure, probably have PTFE. So if they say it's for sewing machines, or you contact the manufacturer and say, hey, can I use this on my sewing machine, and get their opinion. I just happen to like this brand, but using a Singer sewing machine oil would be okay. The main thing is to keep it lubricated and to wipe up excess oil and grease. Because if it's not where the metal is contacting, or it's not down in a bushing or bearing, it's just going to collect dust and lint and make a problem. So after you oil up everything and run the machine a couple of minutes, then go back with your oil rag or Q-tips or both, and just clean up the excess. Thanks for tuning in. That might be the longest video you ever watched about oiling a sewing machine. But I've done them longer than this, believe me. Anyway, thanks for watching AndyTube. I hope you find it interesting and worth your time, and I hope you come back and watch some of my other videos. I have almost 350 now, so there's got to be something in there that would be interesting to you. Take care.